The moment I saw the word she had written under relationship, my hands went cold around the clipboard. Outside the urgent care window, the afternoon sun was bright enough to turn every passing car into a flash of silver, but inside that waiting room, everything seemed to dim. My roommate, the woman who had spent nearly 2 years insisting she did not need anyone, had written my name in the emergency contact box. Then, beneath it, where the form asked how we were related, she had carefully printed one word that changed everything I thought I knew about her: family. Before I tell you how a routine trip to urgent care uncovered the truth she had been hiding, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Your support helps our community keep sharing stories that remind people they are not alone. My name is Everett Cole, and until that day, I would have described my roommate, Laurel Whitmore, as the most independent person I had ever met. She was 29, worked as an assistant curator at a small history museum, and treated self-reliance as if it were a sacred promise. She carried her own groceries even when the bags cut red lines into her fingers. She fixed leaking faucets by watching tutorials during her lunch break. When she caught a bad cold the previous winter, she still dragged herself into the kitchen to make soup rather than ask me to heat a can for her. Laurel was not unfriendly. In fact, she had a quiet kindness that appeared in small, careful ways. She remembered how I took my coffee, left the last clean towel outside the bathroom when she knew I had an early meeting, and once spent an entire Saturday helping me rewrite a presentation after my laptop crashed. But whenever kindness was directed toward her, she became uncomfortable, as if accepting help placed her under a debt she could never repay. We had become roommates through a property listing after both of us reached a point where living alone had become too expensive. I was 31 and working as an architectural draftsman, still trying to rebuild my savings after a failed engagement had left me with a cancelled wedding, a stack of non-refundable deposits, and a deep suspicion of promises. Laurel had moved into the apartment with 3 boxes of books, 2 suitcases, and a framed photograph she kept face down inside the drawer of her bedside table. We established an easy routine without becoming emotionally close. We divided rent, replaced groceries, respected closed doors, and exchanged enough conversation to make the apartment feel warm without making either of us feel exposed. It was safe, practical, and uncomplicated, which was exactly what we both claimed to want. The day everything changed began with a heat-heavy late morning in early August. Sunlight pressed against the apartment windows, and the air conditioner rattled without providing much relief. I was working from the dining table when I heard something fall in the hallway. At first, I assumed Laurel had dropped one of her books. Then I heard a second sound, softer and more frightening, like a body sliding against the wall. I found her sitting on the floor outside the bathroom, one hand gripping her side and the other pressed against the tile. Her face was pale beneath a thin layer of sweat. When she tried to stand, her knees buckled, and for the first time since I had known her, she did not tell me she was fine. She only looked at me with frightened gray eyes and admitted that the pain had started that morning and had become too sharp to ignore. That I wanted to call an ambulance, but Laurel insisted she could make it to urgent care. Even in pain, she apologized for interrupting my work and tried to retrieve her own shoes. I stopped her, helped her onto the couch, and brought the shoes to her feet. She stared at me as I tied the laces, looking almost embarrassed by the intimacy of being cared for. The drive took less than 15 minutes, but every red light felt cruel. Laurel sat curled toward the passenger door, breathing carefully and clutching the edge of the seat. I kept glancing at her while trying not to show how worried I was. She had always seemed unbreakable, and seeing her reduced to silence made me realize how much of my daily life depended on her steady presence. The urgent care building stood beside a pharmacy and a dentist's office, its glass doors reflecting the white afternoon sky. Inside, the receptionist handed Laurel several forms. She tried to fill them out, but her hand trembled so badly that the pen slipped twice. I offered to help, and after a brief hesitation, she passed me the clipboard. Most of the questions were ordinary: address, insurance, allergies, current medications. Then I reached the emergency contact section. My name was already written there in Laurel's uneven handwriting. She must have filled in that portion before the pain became too intense. My phone number appeared beneath it, followed by the question asking for our relationship. That was where I saw the word family. I stared at it longer than I should have. We had never called each other family. We had never even called each other close friends. We were roommates who shared takeout on Fridays and watched old detective shows when neither of us had plans. Yet Laurel had chosen me as the person to be called if something happened to her, and she had not written roommate, friend, or housemate. She had written family with such deliberate pressure that the final letter had nearly torn the paper. I looked at her across the waiting room. Her eyes were closed, her face tense with pain, and suddenly I understood that the distance she maintained had never meant I was unimportant. Perhaps it meant the opposite. Perhaps she had kept me at arm's length because losing people mattered too much. A nurse called Laurel's name before I could ask about the form. I followed her toward the examination rooms, but she stopped at the doorway and told me I did not have to come. The old version of me would have accepted that escape. I had spent years avoiding situations where people might expect emotional responsibility from me. But the word on the form remained in my mind. I told her I was staying unless she specifically wanted me gone. Her expression shifted, and for a moment the pain on her face was replaced by something even more vulnerable. She moved aside and let me enter. The clinician suspected a severe kidney infection and dehydration. Laurel needed imaging, medication, and possibly hospital treatment if the tests showed complications. While the nurse prepared an intravenous line, Laurel became visibly anxious. She looked away from the needle and gripped the side of the examination table. Without thinking, I offered my hand. She held it so tightly my fingers ached, but I did not pull away. The room was filled with daylight from a narrow window, and somewhere outside, a lawn mower hummed across the medical complex. Everything about the moment seemed ordinary except for the fact that Laurel was allowing herself to depend on me. When the nurse stepped out, I finally asked why she had written family. Laurel released my hand immediately, as though she had been caught revealing something private. She said it was only because she had no one else nearby. Her explanation was calm, but her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I told her she could have written roommate. She looked toward the window and said that roommate did not feel accurate anymore. Then she went silent. The truth came slowly. Laurel had grown up in a home where affection was unpredictable. Her mother disappeared for weeks at a time when Laurel was young, chasing relationships and opportunities that never lasted. Her father remarried and gradually treated Laurel like a difficult reminder of his old life. By 17, she had learned that needing people gave them power to abandon her. The only person she fully trusted was her older sister, Cecily, who practically raised her. Cecily had died in a car accident 6 years earlier on a bright spring afternoon. After that, Laurel stopped using the word family for anyone. She moved cities, avoided serious relationships, and built a life where no one could leave a hole large enough to destroy her. She admitted that living with me had unsettled that careful system. I had become part of her routine without demanding entry into her past. I noticed when she skipped meals. I replaced the porch light before she had to ask. I left space for her on difficult days and brought her coffee after stressful museum events. She had begun thinking of the apartment as home, and of me as the person she trusted to be there when she returned. Writing family on the form had not been planned. It had simply been the only word that felt honest. Her confession struck a place in me I had kept buried beneath resentment. After my engagement ended, I told everyone I was relieved to discover the truth before the wedding. What I did not admit was how deeply the rejection had changed me. My former fiancée had not left because of one dramatic betrayal. She had simply decided that the future we planned no longer suited her, and she made that decision without allowing me to be part of it. I had spent months feeling foolish for believing I belonged in someone else's permanent plans. Since then, I had confused emotional distance with strength. Laurel and I had been protecting ourselves in different ways from the same fear. The clinician returned with test results and recommended that Laurel be transferred to the hospital for further treatment. The infection had spread enough to require observation and stronger antibiotics. Laurel's first reaction was not concern for her health but panic over the cost, her job, and the museum exhibit she was supposed to supervise the following morning. She tried to stand, insisting she could manage medication at home. The clinician firmly explained that delaying care could become dangerous. Laurel looked at me, silently pleading for permission to escape. Instead, I told her the exhibit would survive without her and that I would contact her supervisor. I promised to bring whatever she needed from the apartment. I reminded her that accepting treatment was not weakness. Laurel's face crumpled then, not dramatically, but with the exhausted surrender of someone who had held herself together too long. She covered her eyes with one hand and began to cry. I sat beside her and let the silence carry what neither of us knew how to say. While arrangements were made for the transfer, I called the museum and explained the situation. Her supervisor, a woman named Meredith Shaw, immediately expressed concern and promised to handle everything. Then she revealed something Laurel had never mentioned: the museum staff had been worried about her for months. Laurel had been taking extra shifts, covering absent coworkers, and skipping vacation days. Meredith had repeatedly encouraged her to rest, but Laurel always insisted she was needed. Hearing that made the pattern clear. Laurel did not only avoid asking for help. She made herself indispensable so no one would have a reason to leave her. The ambulance transfer was brief, and I followed in my car. At the hospital, Laurel was admitted to a sunlit room on the 4th floor. The doctor expected a full recovery, but she would need at least 2 days of observation. By then, the afternoon had softened, and long shadows stretched across the parking lot below. I returned to the apartment to collect clothes, her phone charger, and the mystery novel resting beside her bed. While searching the drawer for a hair tie, I accidentally saw the framed photograph she always kept hidden. It showed Laurel and Cecily standing beside a lake, both laughing into the wind. On the back, in faded handwriting, Cecily had written that home was not a place but the person who made it safe to be imperfect. That I sat on the edge of Laurel's bed with that sentence in my hands. Suddenly, her stubbornness no longer seemed cold or difficult. It seemed like grief wearing armor. I thought of all the ways she had quietly taken care of me while refusing to admit she needed care herself. After my engagement ended, she had never pushed me to talk. She simply began making too much coffee every morning and leaving the extra cup beside my laptop. When the anniversary of the cancelled wedding arrived, she suggested we repaint the living room, giving me something physical to do with a day I had been dreading. She had been offering love in the only language that felt safe to her, and I had accepted it without recognizing its weight. When I returned to the hospital, Laurel was awake, watching sunlight move across the wall. I gave her the photograph and told her I had seen the message on the back. Shame crossed her face, but I assured her she had nothing to apologize for. I told her that after my engagement ended, I had stopped believing family could be chosen because choosing created the possibility of being rejected. Yet she had chosen me on a medical form during one of the most frightening moments of her life. I wanted her to know I was choosing her too, not because she was helpless, not because she owed me anything, but because she mattered. Laurel cried again, but this time she did not hide her face. She admitted she had almost crossed out the word family because she feared I would think it was too much. I confessed that it had frightened me, but only because it felt true. We did not turn the moment into romance or make impossible promises. What happened between us was quieter and, in some ways, more meaningful. We agreed to stop treating vulnerability like a burden. We agreed that home should be a place where either of us could say something was wrong before collapsing in a hallway. We agreed to become the kind of family that asked, listened, stayed, and forgave imperfect attempts at closeness. Laurel recovered steadily. By the second afternoon, her color had returned, and she was complaining about the hospital food, which I took as an excellent sign. Meredith visited with a card signed by the museum staff and informed Laurel that her unused vacation time would begin immediately after discharge. Instead of arguing, Laurel accepted. That small surrender seemed almost heroic. She was beginning to understand that being valued did not require constant usefulness. after she came home, our apartment changed in subtle ways. The practical boundaries remained, but the emotional walls softened. Laurel began asking for help before situations became emergencies. I began speaking honestly when memories of my broken engagement made me withdraw. We started having Sunday lunches at the little table by the window, not because it was convenient, but because rituals gave shape to belonging. Laurel placed the photograph of Cecily on the living room shelf instead of hiding it in a drawer. Beside it, months later, she added a photograph of the two of us standing outside the museum after her first major exhibit opened. On the back, she wrote that family sometimes arrived without ceremony, carrying groceries, spare keys, and the courage to stay. Nearly a year after the urgent care visit, I found the original discharge paperwork while organizing a cabinet. The medical form had been copied and returned with the documents. There was my name, my phone number, and the word family still pressed deeply into the paper. I showed it to Laurel, and she smiled with the peaceful confidence of someone who no longer regretted telling the truth. We framed that small section of the form and placed it near Cecily's photograph, not as a reminder of illness, but as evidence of the day two guarded people finally admitted they had become important to each other. The lesson Laurel and I learned was simple, though neither of us had found it easy: family is not always determined by blood, romance, or legal names. Sometimes it is the person who notices your pain before you explain it. Sometimes it is the person who drives you toward help when fear tells you to turn back. Sometimes it is the person whose name you write down when the world asks who should be called if you cannot face the crisis alone. Before this story ends, please leave a meaningful comment about someone who became family to you through kindness, loyalty, or simply choosing to stay. Your words may remind another person that the love they have built is real, even when it does not fit a traditional label. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Laurel once believed needing another person was the most dangerous thing she could do. I once believed being chosen was temporary and promises were only invitations to disappointment. But on a bright afternoon inside a crowded urgent care waiting room, one handwritten word began to heal us both. She wrote family because, deep down, she already knew the truth. I stayed because, deep down, I knew it too. And from that day forward, neither of us had to pretend we were alone.